themselves a positive wound, more torturing than that of a mosquito, and leaving more annoyance behind. These tormentors elevated dress parade into the dignity of a military engagement. I had to stand motionless with my head a mere nebula of winged atoms, while tears rolled profusely down my face from mere muscular irritation. Had I stirred a finger, the whole battalion would have been slapping its cheek. Such enemies were, however, a valuable aid to discipline on the whole, as they abounded in the guard-house, and made that institution an object of unusual abhorrence among the men. The presence of ladies, and the homelike air of everything, made the picket station a very popular resort while we were there. It was the one agreeable ride from Beaufort, and we often had a dozen people unexpectedly to dinner. On such occasions there was sometimes mounting in hot haste and in eager search among the outlying plantations for additional chickens and eggs, or through the company kitchens for some of those villainous tin cans which everywhere marked the progress of our army. In those cans, so far as my observation went, all fruit relapsed into a common acidulation, and all meats into a similarity of tastelessness, while the condensed milk was best described by the men, who often unconsciously stumbled on a better joke than they knew, and always spoke of it as condemned milk. We had our own excursions, too, to the Barnwell plantations, with their beautiful avenues and great live oaks, the perfection of southern beauty, to Hawes Island, debatable ground, close to the enemy's fire, where half-wild cattle were to be shot, under military precautions, like Scottish moss-trooping, or to the Ferry, where it was fascinating to the female mind to scan the rebel pickets through a field-glass. Our horses liked the byways far better than the level hardness of the Shell Road, especially those we had brought from Florida, which enjoyed the wildness as they had belonged to Marion's men. They delighted to feel the long sedge brush their flanks, or to gallop down the narrow wood-paths, leaping the fallen trees, and scaring the bright little lizards which shot across our track like live rays broken from the sunbeams. We had an abundance of horses, mostly captured, and left in our hands by some convenient delay of the post-quartermaster. We had also 2 side-saddles, which, not being munitions of war, could not properly, as we explained, be transferred like other captured articles to the general stock; otherwise the P.Q.M., a married man, would have showed no unnecessary delay in their case. For miscellaneous accommodation there was not an ambulance, that most inestimable of army conveniences, equally ready to carry the merry to a feast or the wounded from a fray. Ambulance was one of those words, rather numerous, which Ethiopian lips were not framed by nature to articulate. Only the highest stages of colored culture could compass it. On the tongue of many it was transformed mystically as amulet, or ambitiously as epaulet, or in culinary fashion as omelette. But it was our experience that an ambulance under any name jolted equally hard. Besides these divertissements, we had more laborious vocations, a good deal of fatigue, and genuine through small alarms. The men went on duty every 3rd day at furthest, and the officers nearly as often, most of the tours of duty lasting 24 hours, though the stream was considered to watch itself tolerably well by daylight. This kind of responsibility suited the men, and we had already found, as the whole army afterwards acknowledged, that the constitutional watchfulness and distrustfulness of the colored race made them admirable sentinels. Soon after we went on picket, the commanding general sent an aide, with a cavalry escort, to visit all the stations, without my knowledge. They spent the whole night, and the officer reported that he could not get within 30 yards of any post without a challenge. This was a pleasant assurance for me, since our position seemed so secure, compared with Jacksonville, and that I had feared some relaxation of vigilance, while yet the safety of all depended on our thorough discharge of duty. Jacksonville had also seasoned the men so well that they were no longer nervous, and did not waste much powder on false alarms. The rebels made no formal attacks, and rarely attempted to capture pickets. Sometimes they came stealing through the creeks in dugouts, as we did on their side of the water, and occasionally an officer of ours was fired upon while making his rounds by night. Often some boat or scow would go adrift, and sometimes a mere dark mass of river-weed would be floated by the tide past the successive stations, eliciting a challenge and perhaps a shot from each. I remember the vivid way in which one of the men stated to his officer the manner in which a faithful picket should do his duty after challenging, in case a boat came in sight. "Fust ting I shoot, and den I shoot, and den I shoot again. Den I creep up near de boat, and see who dey in 'em, and s'pose anybody pop up de head, den I shoot again. S'pose I fire my 40 rounds, I tink he hear at de camp, and send more mans," which seemed a reasonable presumption. The soldier's name was Paul Jones, a daring fellow, quite worthy of his namesake. In time, however, they learned quieter methods, and would wade out far in the water, there standing motionless at last, hoping to surround and capture these floating boats, though to their great disappointment the prize usually proved empty. On one occasion they tried a still profounder strategy, for an officer visiting the pickets after midnight, and hearing in the stillness a portentous snore from the end of the causeway, our most important station, straightway hurried to the point of danger with wrath in his soul. But the sergeant of the squad came out to meet him, imploring silence, and explaining that they had seen or suspected a boat hovering near, and were feigning sleep in order to lure and capture those who would entrap them. The one military performance of the picket station of which my men were utterly intolerant was an occasional flag of truce, for which this was appointed locality. These farces, for which it was our duty to furnish the stock actors, always struck them as being utterly despicable and unworthy the serious business of war. They felt, I suppose, what Mr. Pickwick felt when he heard his counsel remark to the counsel for the plaintiff that it was a very fine morning. It goaded their souls to see the young officers from the two opposing armies salute each other courteously and interchange cigars. They despised the object of such negotiations, which was usually to send over to the enemy some family of rebel women who had made themselves quite intolerable on our side, but were not above collecting a subscription among the Union officers before departure, to replenish their wardrobes. The men never showed disrespect to these women by word or deed, but they hated them from the bottom of their souls. Besides, there was a grievance behind all this. The rebel order remained unrevoked, which consigned the new colored troops and their officers to a felon's death if captured, and we all felt that we fought with ropes round our necks. "There's no flags ob truce for us," the men would contemptuously say. "When de Secesh fight de first South Carolina, he fight in earnest." Indeed, I myself took it as rather a compliment when the commander on the other side, though an old acquaintance of mine in Massachusetts and in Kansas, at first refused to negotiate through me or my officers, a refusal which was kept up, greatly to the enemy's inconvenience, until our men finally captured some of the opposing pickets, and their friends had to waive all scruples in order to send them supplies. After this there was no trouble, and I think that the first rebel officer in South Carolina who officially met any officer of colored troops under a flag of truce was Captain John C. Calhoun. In Florida we had been so recognized long before, but that was when they wished to frighten us out of Jacksonville. Such was our life on picket at Port Royal, a thing whose memory is now fast melting into such stuff as dreams are made of. We stayed there more than 2 months at that time. The first attack on Charleston exploded with one puff, and had its end. General Hunter was ordered north, and the busy Gilmore reigned in his stead. And in June, when the blackberries were all eaten, we were summoned, nothing loath, to other scenes and encampments new. End of Chapter 5. Recording by FNH. Visit www.bookranger.co.uk.